In our last episode, we were using the ministry flowchart to identify ministry balance in our church. In this final episode, we'll look at another tool, the organizational life cycle. See, every organization is like a living organism. It has a birth, life, and eventually can also come to an end. But how can an understanding of the fivefold functions help us identify what stage our church is at and the steps that may need to be taken in order that we don't decline?
Welcome to another one of our Leadership Matters series. This time we are taking a unique look at the fivefold gifts from Ephesians 4 and how they apply within each of our ministries. Just click the link in the description box to download our free resources or the complete workbook. You can access any of our other podcasts by going to icmcanada.org/leadershipmatters.
You see, another way of viewing the fivefold gifts is through the lens of an organizational life cycle. This and the flowchart are included as part of our MCNet CHEA, C-H-E-A, Church Health Evaluation Assessment, which you can download from our website, icmcanada.org. A shorter version is included here in the resource section of this workbook. And if you're following along, we're now on pages 57 to 60. See, the life cycle chart is a way of tracing the beginnings of an organization from inception to maturity and possible decline. Bullard suggests that there are four organizing principles from the DNA of a life cycle of an organization that can be applied to the church. These are vision, relationships, programs, and management. See, vision is the current understanding of God's strategic direction cast by the leadership and owned by the members. Relationships refers to the process by which people are converted, assimilated, grow spiritually, utilize gifts, and develop as leaders. Programs refers to those activities and ministries then that serve the church, and management is the administration of the physical resources, but also includes decision-making, changing culture, and systems. It's important to remember these definitions as we go through these. As you can see from the diagram, in each stage there is different emphasis and need. This is represented by the capitalization of each of the letters, V, R, P, and M, standing of course for Vision, Relationships, Program, Management. During each stage of the development, for example, during the birthing stage, vision is most emphasized and important. As the church develops healthy relationships, the letter R, ministries are established and grow. As the church matures, effective programs that meet the needs of the body are functioning, representing the letter P. Eventually, healthy administration allows for a reproducing ministry and evaluation of the organization, and that's the letter M. However, the decline of the organization occurs if we focus on our past successes and fail to recast new vision. See, when vision starts to go, most people in the church or organization do not really recognize the decline at that point. Things are still humming along pretty good. We're living off all the great successes of the past. You know, as the organization ages, contentment invariably leads to a loss of vision, and this eventually leads to a breakdown in relationships, which means outreach slows and members no longer are growing. This is when people become discontent and notice that something has changed. See, and if intentional steps to move the organization to a new life cycle are not taken at this stage of atrophy, the death of the church organization is almost inevitable. This does not mean that the doors close instantly. There can still be many good programs and many systems are still there that are put in place, during the church's glory days. However, there's a loss of vision and purpose. Okay, I don't have time here to get into this in too much detail, but if you want a fuller explanation, you can check out our coaching guide for our team leaders or order our material on this topic. But for our purposes here, I would like to use a hybrid of this tool from some of Hirsch's research. This can help us identify deficiencies in the fivefold functions by determining where the organization is on its life cycle. So let's look at some graph. Let's look at the same graph now through this lens. See, the fundamental question regarding the fivefold ministry functions are which are needed along each stage of the life cycle. Identifying what stage of ministry the ministry is at will help us to recognize where we are lacking in our fivefold ministry mix. See, the top of the curve of the graph indicates a healthy, mature church, which is identified by looking at the four indicators of vision, relationships, program, and management, which I just briefly explained. But viewing the graph through the lens of the fivefold approach, it would make sense that at this stage of maturity, all five of the equipping gifts are functioning in balance as we see in Ephesians 4. But to get to this maturity adult stage, at some time in the past, the church began with a visionary or a group of visionaries. At the birth stage then, the vision is crucial and most typically accomplished by those with apostolic giftings. See, then the early vision stage nearly always is initiated and carried out by entrepreneurs and risk takers. They see a need and a way to meet that need. This early stages often include those who see God's heart and are passionate about sharing it with others. See, in this early stage, there are also usually those with more prophetic giftings, those risk takers, analytical strategists, and out-of-the-box thinkers. See, if the church is going to continue to grow beyond this to its relational stage, it will be essential that those with evangelistic giftings are released to engage with the community and mobilize others in this fledgling body to join them, as typically will happen in the early development stage. These are the communicators who have the gifting to network people and gather others together. See, as the believing community grows, for it to come to full maturity, the top of the graph, members' needs will need to be met. And this will require, of course, the pastoral giftings. This together with the teaching giftings will enable personal and organizational growth and reproducibility. See, at each stage of the life cycle, different equipping functions are needed to move it to the next level of growth and maturity. When all of these are functioning in balance, the church is at the top of the cycle, healthy, mature, and growing in depth and breadth. However, churches and all organizations do not remain healthy left on their own. Left to themselves, they often become complacent, ingrown, and self-satisfied. We have elsewhere illustrated this as the hardening of the wineskins. This is likely a function of human nature, but needs to be guarded against. And this begins with the initial loss of vision or mission drift as the organization loses its purpose and reason to exist. What often then happens is that its mere existence becomes the purpose. The organization and leaders begin to rely on patterns of the past and previous solutions to solve their new problems, which inevitably leads to the aging stage. See, the more successful a church or organization has been, the greater the tendency to rest on its past successes, which leads to a quicker decline. Without constant attention, ensuring that all of the fivefold ministry gifts are allowed to function, every church will become out of balance, which unfortunately usually results in its decline. Once atrophy sets in, there may still be good relationships and teaching. After all, structures have been developed to maintain those. In other words, the pastoral and teaching gifts are still functioning. However, typically one or more of the fivefold functions are no longer present. See, the atrophy stage of organizational maintenance means that the apostolic, prophetic, and maybe the evangelistic gifts are no longer functioning. By this point, the innovators and the disruptors have typically become sidelined, as the new value of the group is to ensure that all of the success that they once achieved is maintained at all costs. Change has become a kind of a bad word in the culture of the group. At this stage of the church or organization, you begin to hear a phrase that you never used to hear in the past. When people come up with a new idea, you'll hear people say, well, we've never done it like that in the past. Before you start hearing that, once you start hearing that phrase though, you know the handwriting is on the wall. In this scenario, the apostolic visionary entrepreneurs are sidelined. Prophetic voices no longer speak truth to the organization, and the evangelistic gifting is constrained so as to not attract all sorts of undesirables who may mess up the new carpet in the church. Death of the church at this point is usually inevitable. So how does viewing the life cycle through the lens of the fivefold functions affect your perception of the health of your church or your organization?
We have various free resources available. They will help you discover your own fivefold gift mix as well as that of your team. The ministry flowchart and life cycle will help you renew the wineskins of your ministry. There are links to these materials in the description box below. You can view any of Phil's other podcast series by going to icmcanada.org/leadershipmatters. These include Mentoring Intelligence, Finishing the Race, and Multicultural Teams. If you want a more comprehensive leadership training program for you or your team, check out our Christian Leadership Institute. This is a unique competency-based ministerial training, which utilizes an online platform. For any of our other resources, please visit our library at icmcanada.org/resources.
By using the flowchart and life cycle, we can identify how the fivefold ministry gifts are indicators of a healthy church. Health being defined as a maturing community that is able to reproduce its ministries through the community. It is a ministry that is fulfilling its calling as part of God's mission. And regardless of church tradition, from Catholic to Protestant, evangelical to Pentecostal, and every variation in between, I believe that without a fivefold ministry approach, the church will not be healthy and will not be able to grow and reproduce. This is amplified if there is a culture of a clergy-laity divide. It is not enough to just ascribe to the theology of the priesthood of all believers. We must develop ministry structures that facilitate all believers being equipped to do the work of the ministry. Examples of this divide are not hard to find. In the Catholic tradition, the sacraments can only be administered by the priest, while mainline Protestantism modified this to include only those who are ordained. And as we have seen, the Western Reformation did very little to reform these structures. A new form of clericalism and religious sacraments were established that became as entrenched as those from the ecclesiastical tradition that they came from. Even in current evangelicalism, church has come to mean attending a certain building on Sunday from which the sacraments and ordinance are dispensed from the ordained professional clergy. See, in light of this, it is no surprise that the church has become identified as a place, not a people, who are on a mission. In the last couple episodes, we've been looking at two tools that can help us identify our effectiveness or the health of our ministries. Yet in order to implement this new approach, we need to develop new wineskins that will enable the functioning of this new vision or new wine. Without new structures, we tend to revert back to old patterns, usually in the form of a reductionist approach of only 2 or 3 of the fivefold functions. See, in developing new wineskins, it is important to remember that those fivefold functions are not offices or positions. The goal is not to create a new structure of the church based on the 5 positions rather than the one pastoral one. Due to many factors that have developed over hundreds of years, as well as existing denominational policies, typical church governance structures, and so on, it's unlikely that church structure is going to see any widespread change anytime soon. Call me a realist, I guess. But at the same time, I'm not really a pessimist. We may not be able to change the whole world, but we can change our world. And I'm suggesting that in order to have a balanced ministry, we do need to think of ways that we can incorporate a fivefold approach in our teams and our local churches in order to fulfill the mission of the church. Ultimately, we have the promise that Jesus said He will build His church. And as I presented in this series, I believe that as we allow the fivefold gifts to function, we will be better partners with Jesus as He builds His church. It seems from Scripture that the fivefold gifts were expected to function in the early church. What is not quite so clear is the definitive structure as to how to best implement them. This ambiguity of application seems to indicate to me that Jesus is wanting us to seek to be connected to Him, the originator and source of the church. All ministry flows out of relationship with Him. It's not just about the task, but about a relationship He seeks with us. He wants to see each member, all of us, grow up and be equipped so that we can be His hands and feet in this world. I think it also indicates the need for flexibility in how we apply these principles with our own time and with our own context. How can the use and implementation of the life cycle chart help us maintain a healthy, balanced church organization? Maybe spend some time with your team discussing this. Well, I hope this study has been helpful as we all partner together with the Lord of the church in developing healthy ministries that will reach into our hurting world. As I've outlined here, I believe that the most effective way we can accomplish this is by releasing His fivefold ministry to function freely in and through His body, empowered by His Spirit. What a privilege and opportunity to partner together with Him as we make disciples of all peoples.
Thank you for listening to Leadership Matters and subscribing and sharing us. If you would like to have your own copy of this study, just click on the link in the description box. For any of our other leadership resources, check out our website, icmcanada.org/resources.